Hello, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Moore's October Rants. Today's episode is going to be titled Myself. As we go through life, we often rely on others. We want to make friends, have meaningful conversations, and build those connections that make us feel understood. It's only natural to want that, to want to feel like we're not alone in the world. But if I'm being honest, there's something that we tend to forget, something that's easy to overlook in the hustle of it all. At the end of the day, all we truly have is ourselves. We go through life expecting that our friends will be there for us, thinking we'll find people who have our backs when it matters. We work hard to cultivate relationships, sometimes even at the expense of our own well being, trying to prove to others and maybe to ourselves that we can fit in, that we matter. But here's the thing: at the end of the day, when the dust settles, it's just us. All we have is ourselves. And that can be a hard pill to swallow. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I've been in a place where it's been difficult to find someone to talk to find people I can rely on in the way I would like. And I'm starting to realize that no matter how hard I try or how much I wish for it, I am ultimately my own best friend. It's a tough realization, but an important one. It's a realization that when you strip away all the noise, it's you who has to live with yourself. And honestly, that's something we all need to come to terms with sooner or later. There are moments in life when you'll feel incredibly alone. It happens to all of us. You could be surrounded by people but still feel isolated, or you could have days where you're physically alone but feel a deep sense of loneliness that cuts deeper than anything. And in those moments, you really start to understand that while friends and relationships are important, they can't fill the void that exists inside. No one else can. That's why getting comfortable with yourself is so important. You have to be able to sit with your own thoughts, to be okay with your own company. I know it sounds like a simple thing, but for a lot of people, it's hard. They're constantly looking for validation from others, constantly seeking external approval. But what happens when there's no one around? What happens when the noise dies down and you're left to face your own reflection? This all brings me to something that really resonates with me: the song Boulevard of Broken Dreams by Green Day. Uh, the line, I walk alone, speaks to me in a way that no other lyric really does. When I first moved to the city, I didn't know anyone, so I would just walk around, exploring the streets by myself. Over time, I didn't just walk around the city, I walked through life alone. Even years later, as I started making friends and connecting with people online, I still felt like I was walking alone. It wasn't about being physically alone all the time, but it was about that internal loneliness, that feeling of not really being seen or understood by anyone. And in a way, I think that's something a lot of people can relate to. That's why I love the song so much. It's not just about walking alone in the physical sense, but about how loneliness can seep into your soul. It speaks to that moment when you realize that you're going to have to face your own struggles, your own thoughts, and maybe no one else is going to be there to walk with you. And I think it's beautiful in a way because it teaches you that even in those moments of solitude, there's strength to be found. But more importantly, it teaches you that if you're going to walk through life alone, you need to get to know yourself. When you're alone, it's easy to feel like you're missing something. But what if, instead of looking for something outside of ourselves, we focused on the one thing we always have: ourselves? No one is going to come in and do the work for you. No one's going to magically fix your internal world. At the end of the day, the relationship you have with yourself is the most important one you'll ever have. If you can't learn to love yourself, if you can't be comfortable in your own skin, then how can you expect others to? How can you attract the kind of relationships that nourish you if you don't even nourish yourself first? It's not about thinking you're perfect or that you're better than anyone else. It's about coming to a place of acceptance. I'm not saying you should worship yourself or put yourself on a pedestal, but it's important to reach a point where you're okay with who you are, even when no one else is around to validate it. If you can't be alone with yourself, if you can't sit quietly with your own thoughts, then how are you supposed to share your life with someone else? There's something so freeing about getting to know yourself. It's like you stop seeking answers from the outside and start finding them within. And that's a powerful shift. You stop looking for external validation and start creating your own sense of peace and contentment. And trust me, it makes a world of difference. It's the difference between constantly feeling like something's missing and realizing that you, as you are right now, are enough. I've noticed that a lot of people, especially in today's world, are struggling with themselves. They're angry, they're bitter, they're frustrated, and a lot of that stems from not being okay with who they are. It's exhausting to watch. I see people carrying around so much negativity, and I can't help but think that if they just took the time to get to know themselves, to truly get comfortable with their own skin, a lot of that frustration would melt away. If they could find peace within themselves, they wouldn't be so quick to lash out at the world. They'd understand that a lot of their problems stem from within, and only they can fix them. As you get older, you'll start to feel more isolated, more alone. It's just a part of life. Relationships change, people move away, and sometimes you're left with just yourself. And that's okay, because when you've built a strong relationship with yourself, you won't fear loneliness. You'll know how to be with yourself, how to enjoy your own company, and how to thrive in solitude. You'll realize that being alone doesn't have to mean being lonely. That's one of the reasons why COVID didn't bother me as much as it did others. For so many people, the isolation felt like a shock to their system. But for me, it was just another day. I've always been somewhat reclusive, always gravitated towards solitude. I worked, came home, and stayed inside. I didn't go out much, and honestly, I didn't have a ton of people to hang out with anyway. So, when everyone else was panicking about being stuck at home, I was already used to it. It wasn't a big shift for me because I was already living in that space of being alone and being okay with it. At the end of the day, all we really have is ourselves. The sooner we realize that, the sooner we can start building a life where we don't need anyone else's approval to feel worthy. So get to know yourself. Learn to love yourself. Because when everything else falls away, you'll still have you. And that's the most important relationship you'll ever have. Anyways, thank you for listening to this episode of the Moore's October Rants. Signing out. Have a good one, everyone. Goodbye.